Joel, for that incredibly kind introduction. I had a really great 2 years here, and I'm glad to be back. So I'm going to read from a new novel of mine called The Effigies that I wrote basically right after I graduated from the program. I just immediately started writing a new book right when I graduated, and the novel is really influenced by Japanese science fiction, particularly what I think they would call the mecha genre, but I'm not going to explain anything else. I'm just going to start reading. So this is the first chapter of The Effigies, and it's called Fragarak. Fragarak was the fifth aspect to come through the gate, and the largest. 3 effigies would go out to meet him. 3 of the pilots that Seo-hyun was responsible for taking care of. It would be a dangerous fight, more dangerous than anything. But there was nothing she could do from inside the command center, except watch. Nothing anyone could do. It was a beautiful thing to see the giants fight, but it was also terrible. Seo-hyun watched the silhouettes of the 3 effigies set out, standing nearly 300 meters tall, their broad, armored shoulders gleaming in the sunlight, their faces covered by angular, jutting masks. They were metal grafted onto flesh, the lean, armored bulk of them, the joints exposed just faintly between heavy plating. The effigies walked with an unnatural grace, a contradictory slowness, like a body underwater. Every time Seo-hyun saw them, it surprised her that those immense limbs could move. As the effigies approached the battlefield, Seo-hyun could still make out the shape of the gate beyond them, an archway of stone, 5 kilometers wide and 3 kilometers tall. So soon, the aspect would step through that pale mist in the center, as 4 others had done before it. Like everyone, Seo-hyun had thought about the gateway for so much of her life, but even she didn't know much about it, only how opaque it was, how impossible to understand. Nothing went in or out of that gate, the world had always thought, until 20 years ago, they had seen the first shadow of the aspect come through. Most cameras showed the battle from far away, so the giants would appear as figures in an unmarked landscape, regal, almost godlike, striking and clashing and carving craters when they fell. A few cameras had been placed nearby, angled upwards as if to emphasize the immense height of the things. These were frequently destroyed and had to be replaced before the next battle. When Seo-hyun glanced at those monitors, usually she saw only a single limb, so big it filled the whole screen, or an empty sky punctuated by the quick shadow of something passing over. It had been the better part of a year since the last battle, and after all that waiting, it had been almost a relief when the shadow appeared. They had seen Fragarak early that morning, faintly visible behind the mist. It had been a slow approach, one of the slowest on record. Watching as the girth of the shadow filled in, the priest had identified him as the Impaler hours ago. The bulk of his shoulders, 2 horns on either side of his head, a weapon held up in one hand. It was an important thing when an aspect was given the name of one of the gods, but also meaningless, and all Seo-hyun cared about was what she saw when he stepped through. He was immense, nearly 350 meters, with dark armor all across his sturdy, heaving frame. The helmet covered what would have been his face, but with no flesh behind it, only more of that dark metal. His posture, as he stepped forward, emphasized his thick limbs and heavy chest. Even the effigies appeared small next to him, like children standing beneath an adult. But he was fast, so fast, and he came through the gate with his lance raised. During the battle, Seo-hyun stood near Tako Shimura, the most important man in the facility, maybe in the world. She'd known that he was brilliant even before coming to the spire, but it still surprised her how calm he could be in a situation like this. His eyes were cool and hard behind his glasses, both hands held in a relaxed posture behind his back. Once, noting her glances, he put a hand on her shoulder and said in a quiet voice, "It's difficult to watch, isn't it? It's not a natural thing, what's happening out there." "But you can't look away," Seo-hyun said. "Have you talked to Dvorak? She says it's ancient, what we're doing here, that it's natural." She would say that, wouldn't she? Shimura laughed. It surprised Seo-hyun that he could manage it, in this place where even glancing away from the screen made her stomach heavy. "Sometimes I wonder if she's right," Shimura said, "though I suppose only time will tell." Shimura shook his head and turned back towards the monitors. They weren't the only ones at the command center who talked sometimes. Seo-hyun kept hearing small bursts of conversation from the staff, sometimes jokes to diffuse the tension or small observation. Anything to disguise the anxiety that they couldn't do anything from here, only watch. Seo-hyun had felt the same vertigo throughout her first battle as well. The sense of standing high in the air, knowing that soon everything she cared about might be destroyed, and there was nothing she could do. The battles with the aspects were hand-to-hand combat on a scale with no precedent in human history. One where each blow struck with enough force to destroy a building, where every body that fell left a crater the size of a small lake. Yet also, they sometimes appeared to move in slow motion. Every time the effigies swung their swords, they pulled their arms back half the length of a football field. The pilots had trained to work as a group, but in practice, one usually went forward alone, while the others circled around back. Their slow, careful approaches reminded Seo-hyun how languid the pace of real combat could be, with such an emphasis on feints and slow strategy. But Fragerak was so much quicker than he looked, so aggressive it was impossible to surround him. Many of the effigies' attacks fell short when they might have succeeded against another aspect, and each time, his lance would strike back so rapidly, nearly catching one of the pilots before they could deflect it or leap aside. As they fought, the pilots' voices were distorted and nearly incomprehensible over the intercom. What they said was never very important when they said anything at all. Occasionally they talked to each other, but mostly it was only sounds that resembled screams or gasps, distorted by their integration with the effigies. In the midst of that, Shimura gave a few commands, which Seo-hyun relayed. She was the only voice the pilots heard during the battles, their only link with the rest of the world. Sometimes the pilots grunted in response, but mostly it was best to leave them alone. Fragerak moved with a furious, flailing strength, as if his own body could not contain him. He swung his lance every time one of the pilots approached, lunging forward to strike, pivoting as another effigy came in from behind. The lance was longer than any of the effigies' swords. It gave him the advantage of a longer range, though with 3 against 1, it seemed like the effigies should be able to get inside it. And they did, so many times, except the armor deflected all but their strongest blows. That stopped, however, when one of the pilots drove their sword through the plating around his left shoulder, so that thick waves of red gushed down across his armor, and another through his neck, unleashing a geyser that spurted for hundreds of meters to one side, a boiling cone of wetness to mark the rock. But even that didn't slow him. Fragerak fought like an animal as he bled, swinging his lance frantically to every side, circling around in giant arcs, and all that time, he never bled any less, even when he took another wound to the chest and one more to the stomach. Right then, near the end of it, was when the pilots let down their guard. All of them began to attack at once, swinging their swords in both hands or charging forwards with their shoulders down. And it felt good. Something felt very right to Seo-hyun as she watched, very satisfying, like Fragerak was getting what he deserved. And she hardly noted that long, empty moment where one effigy stepped back, its weapon held down to one side, as the 2 others attacked. But someone did. Seo-hyun didn't see Fragerak throw his lance, but she saw the results. How the effigy staggered back, once, twice. The immense beam of Fragerak's weapon impaled through its chest, drowned in a churning halo of blood. Fragerak charged past the attacks that came from either side. The wounded effigy floundered at the weapon, trying to pull it out or dislodge it, but the aspect's gauntlets already clutched firmly at the hilt. They wrenched to one side, then arose, lifting the effigy overhead like some strange offering to the light. Held prone, the enormous, armored body flailed in the air, letting go a rain of blood to mark Fragerak's hands and arms, plentiful red tears that fell all across his face. It was a long gesture with a cryptic, almost ritual quality. Both remaining pilots dashed forward, weapons raised to strike. Fragerak didn't react, only stood with both arms over his head as 2 swords pierced his chest. Once wasn't enough. The suspended effigy thrashed above him as the pilot struck again and again, but slower, growing limp with every second that passed. Blood sprayed out along the effigy's blades. More splashed along their faces, bubbling copiously to stain their hands. A perceptible shiver of impact with every blow. Fragrac seemed indestructible. He seemed eternal. But even he fell when they stabbed him so many times. And the effigy fell with him. There was a cry of celebration in the command center when Fragrac fell, but Seo-hyun noted a forced quality to it, almost an awkwardness, which grew with every moment of stillness from the effigy. The pilot was pronounced dead, though Seo-hyun had already known. They'd won, but at a price. Seo-hyun had seen a pilot die before, but that had been someone she'd hardly met, right when she arrived at the spire. This time felt different, no matter who it was. Have them leave the remains. Shimura spoke sharply, but no expression showed on his face. We'll go out for them later. Seo-hyun did as he said, but waited in the command center for a very long time, watching as the silhouettes of the effigies walked towards them, slick with blood, the burning sun at their back. It had been a good fight, but she had lived with all three of those pilots for months now, ever since she came to the spire. And now she would go out to greet only two of them. And then there's a section that I'm not going to be reading where the character meets the two of the pilots who just fought, but I'm skipping to later when they go out to look at the corpse. So they drove out in jeeps from the spire, 8 kilometers towards the battlefield across the open, rocky countryside, beyond the mountains to the east towards the gate to the north. It was already visible when they set out, and only grew as they approached. Seo-hyun had gotten close enough to touch the gate before, once, and it had been otherworldly to stand at the base of that immense stone archway, to hear the sound of it in her ears, this immense humming pulse, sometimes like wind, sometimes like breath, ebbing and flowing with a rhythm that had been studied for hundreds of years but never understood, even now. She had stood so close that she had seen the texture of the mist, uniform, but with a faint membrane across it, a place where the light didn't shine the same. It was a cool, beautiful thing, so inviting she had wanted to reach out and touch it, though she knew she couldn't. Nothing had passed through the gate from this side. Nothing had ever passed through. Only the aspects. Those colossal, monstrous beings that ought to be so kind, but instead could only destroy. Monsters that, in certain parts of the world, were still worshipped. Or things that resembled them, at least. It was their silence, Shimura had told her once, that bothered him most. And even now, when the fifth aspect had been destroyed, he confessed that some small part of him felt excited when he saw a shadow walking through the gate. Each time, he wondered if the aspect might speak. In the old stories, even Fragrac, one of the cruelest of the gods, had spoken to those who approached him. But like the others, the hulking, armored monstrosity that bore his aspect had seemed hardly sentient. No aspect had ever begun to fight so quickly as soon as it saw the effigies. There was something surprising about it, but Seo-hyun knew that, as they watched, another part of Shimura was disappointed. Up close, immense craters marked the earth where the fighting had taken place. When the terrain became too dangerous to drive, they got out and walked. Each crater was 5, sometimes 10 meters deep, laced with cracks and the trace of whatever impact had created it. Each time the giants took a step, or changed direction, or leapt into the air, they left a scar in the earth, and Fragrac had filled it with his blood. So many of the craters had become hollow pools, deep enough to swim in, and that same thick blood marked the ground they walked on, lending a faint, sticky film to each step they took. If Seo-hyun didn't wash it off later, the muck would harden along the soles of her boots, and after the excavation of so many of the workers, they would return leaving footprints of blood. The corpses languished above the rubble, wretched and massive and boiling open. The remains of Fragrac the Impaler resembled a range of mountains fallen backwards to reveal gurgling valleys. The breastplate peeled around the hollow cavern of his abdomen, letting go its avalanche of fluid and viscera. Sometimes the anatomy of an aspect resembled a human being, but more often it didn't. The bodies were usually too mangled after the battles for the function of the parts to be understood. Many of the organs would continue their work for days, lurching and pumping even when they'd been disconnected from the rest, so that fluid spurted from severed valves with nowhere to go, even as they were taken back to the spire to be studied. The remains of the third effigy were still impaled on Fragarac's spear, the torso hanging in the air, both arms trailing down towards the earth, visible marks beneath the knees where they'd slid on impact. So much of the blood on Fragarac had come from the effigy. It had made Seohyun uncomfortable that she couldn't tell the difference, how blood was always the same color no matter who it came from. Cromwell, the pilot, was up there somewhere in that corpse. The effigy could survive even the loss of its primary heart. It was alive now, though it would die in a few hours from its wounds, and no one could ever pilot it again if it had survived. But Cromwell had been crushed to a pace when Fragarac lifted the abortionist, the effigy, overhead. This had been his second battle. "It's still hard to look at," Shimura said, as they approached, leading Seohyun away from the excavators to circle the remains. "But it's good we came now, at least, so there's no smell." "It'll take days to get him down," Seohyun said. "It's a shame." The weather was still clear, with a strong wind. Shimura's eyes were narrowed, hands clasped so tight near his stomach that the knuckles whitened. It would be hours until they smelled the rotting, but by this time tomorrow the stench would make its way towards the spire. Clouds of flies would fill the air, and within a week the remains would be laced with maggots until they were burned. "It might be for the better," Shimura said. "I've heard he was difficult to manage." "More than a little," Seohyun said. "Not that I appreciate the loss." Shimura's steps were considered, careful as he circled the craters, glancing down, then up. "But it's a shame you'll probably have more trouble with his replacement." Seohyun had realized soon after arriving how no one envied her job. The pilots had a reputation for being unpleasant, withdrawn, and sometimes threatening, and her training as a psychologist had done nothing to prepare her for it. Shimura had told her when she arrived that her work would be a success if she stopped the pilots from killing each other, or from hurting other members of the staff. It sounded easy, but sometimes it wasn't. "I've worked with Bjorn for months," Seohyun said. "I think he'll make a good replacement." "You haven't heard the news then," Shimura said, and all at once, it seemed odd that Shimura would be so evasive. Ever since he'd asked her to come here, 2 years ago, Shimura had been open and honest with her, more open than anyone else in the facility, so that she'd soon realize Shimura wanted there as someone to talk to, someone like family, or something close. All that time, when something was a secret, he told her so and left it at that. Otherwise, he was simple and straightforward with her, and when he had something to tell her, he said it. "I wanted to tell you this myself," Shimura said. "But now that I have to do it, I'm not so happy about it." "I don't understand," Seohyun said. "Your brother has told me since he was young that he wanted to be a pilot," Shimura said. "I told him then that I would give him a chance, but he'd have to earn it, and I'll be honest, he has." Seohyun felt a vice close in her throat, so tight she barely managed to speak. "My brother is coming?" she asked. "He's going to be the next pilot?" Shimura nodded and said, "He'll be here in a few hours." That's it.
That's it?
Yeah.